All right, everybody. So I'm going to speak to you to redo a little bit of what I did at Academy last year. And this is a project that we've been doing for some time. And so I'm hoping that today I can discuss some ideas that may help other teams across the open source world to develop, a stronger brand, stronger presence, more concise design. And I don't know if you know a little bit about myself, but I go by Andy most of the time, so I'm Andy Betts. And I've been with KDE for about 20 years or so. And not always on the same angle, but mostly related to design. And over the years, we've gone through a lot of stuff, right? We went through like from KDE 3 to KDE 4, then to KDE 5, and now into 6. And I'm hoping that maybe for the next version of Plasma at some point, we work with what I'm going to show you today. And I am from Chile, and I live in the United States. And this is my dog. This is Lila, and she says hello. She's staying with one of my friends today. So let's talk about a little bit of design, okay? I know this is probably the developer's favorite subject, but I'm sure we can learn something here today. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the situation that we have, I guess in open source in general, because this is something we suffer from, and then how we can, work into the change and develop something more sustainable. And I'm going to show you a little bit of some previews for KDE changes that are happening soon. And then how we apply the design. We're trying to apply a design system for KDE. So let me explain a little bit about the current state. Right now, I guess historically, right, in most of the times, in open source projects, most initiatives are led by individuals. So one person has a great idea, they work on it, the idea grows, they submit it for review, and then, they receive feedback. But at the end of the day, it generally tends to be one person. One person. And when you think about it, that isn't, if you're thinking in terms of an entity, this is not sustainable. You can't run an organization on one person. That's why we come together for stuff like this, right? Because we need the help. And while personal initiative is really good, and it sort of like shoots you off past a lot of barriers, it also shows you very quickly that you cannot scale unless you have help. So some of the things that we notice, at least in KDE, is that personal initiative begins early and begins with code. Most of the times, our audience is composed of mostly developers or junior developers who are learning and working and trying to try something new, and they just happen to like Linux and KDE, whatever it is, or any others like GNOME, for example, and they propose a merge request. And when that happens, at least in KDE, our team reviews that, right? We look up this MR, this merge request, and we start chiming in, and we say, hey, you're missing this, the compatibility with these libraries, or your UI is a little funny, like let's just work on that. But at the end of the day, basically, we pile on all of this feedback onto one person. And we expect that person becomes a developer, a brand person, a designer, that person needs to be a communicator. They will need to do everything. And that's a problem, right? Because we're not everything. We're not like everything for everybody. So this is very difficult. And I'm sure you know that in many of our open source projects, we experience a lot of burnout. Sometimes our hobby becomes our burden, right? Because it's too much. So much feedback is coming to us that we just simply don't or can't do it all. And at some point, we either try to find a way to complete the work that we think is best to do, or we start pushing feedback away, basically. So we say, I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to say that maybe, I'm not going to care about the design very much. And I'll just work on the, whatever I can do. And then added to the fact that maybe many times the people that are actually doing the work, the developer that is doing this, may not know as much development as the senior developers in this project. And so there is a level of quality and institutional knowledge that can be missing, and added on top of that, we pile on all this feedback, right? So that's difficult. That's very difficult. And very quickly, the project becomes way large. It's just larger than you ever imagined. But one thing that we see, at least in KDE, is that many people become, at least on the design side, they are developers/designers. Our developers, at least in KDE, have sort of a mission to not just write code, but also come up with the UI. Because they're very close to the design area, and there is not a system in place that they can use or rely on. Maybe like Live Advaita, that doesn't actually exist in the same shape or form in KDE. So our developers tend to be a little bit closer to the way things will look. And for good and bad, right? So one of the things that has happened is sometimes our developers become designers, or they at least try to, right? And then on the other side, designers at KDE have to become developers, because the same experience that a developer has in building something kind of all on your own, if you come up with a design, you also have to do all of your own. Most of the times there may not be enough resources to kind of like work with a developer to help you achieve the design that you came up with. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword if you make something. And what does that mean for us? That at the end of the day, we have to start thinking of ways to sort of scale back. We just simply cannot deliver at the level that we dreamed of. We have to step back and say, sorry, I don't have a developer that can help me, so I'm just going to say that, well, today we're just going to change a color. That's it, right? We're not going to make the button. We're going to change the color only. That's an easy change. And for our developers as well, they also have to scale back. And at the end of the day, what this comes out to be is that we sort of never have the ability to scale our work, right? And we also have overworked and burned developers and designers, and we just simply can't deliver. But the demand is high, and our teams are small, and we're mostly volunteers. So this is a situation that is very difficult, because I don't know if you noticed, but our Plasma 6 was not a redesign, right? We went from 5 to 6, and it was, ostensibly the same, right? At least on the front end. We didn't change very much. Why? Because we noticed that we didn't have the scale to support something bigger, like a visual style change. Added to the fact that, for example, at least in KDE, we have multiple frameworks that we support. So our developers not only have to come up with the design once for their application, they have to probably do it 2 or 3 times because it's interpreted for different frameworks and we want it to look the same. So that developer has triple the work, right? And so what would you do if you had triple the work, right? You would probably say, no, I'm not going to do that, right? It's illogical. And so, yeah, this is a result of some of these things, and we're trying to address that. But that's the situation. And I'm not, pointing fingers. This is just the state of open source. I think mostly this is something that most of us can relate to, that happens. But when I take a 10,000-foot view for this, that's what I see, right? So we need to change that. And a couple of things in the space have happened over the past few years that have me particularly very excited. And maybe we can come closer to a more sustainable and scalable design to development model that we can implement. I mean, I'm not going to tell you this is like, the Rolls Royce of, process development, but I think at least I see a future a little bit easier for most of us. So we need to change this. For one thing, we need to make sure that we remove our developers from design. And I don't mean this in a bad way. I'm not saying like they're not good designers. I'm just saying that most of the times developers want they want the raw materials, but they don't want to think about what, for example, the house will look like, right? So because what you're interested in, if I'm getting this right, is you're interested in proposing some cool technology that will, 10x our ability, for example, to search for a file on a Linux machine, right? And now the results are quicker. But that comes at the cost of doing a whole lot more than just, implementing that. So in my mind, I think it makes the most sense to help developers implement their technical idea faster by removing the aspect of design from their process. I mean, if they want to be designers, by all means, we need more designers as well. But that would help them focus on so much more than just the technology and so many other things. So we need to change this aspect, and I'm going to show you how we did it, or how we tried to do it. So who of you here have heard about design systems? Okay, cool. So you know a little bit about it. So the bare bones idea about design systems is that they are a collection of graphical assets, sometimes interactive, that live in an application that allows you to organize all these graphics and then in a very smart way marry the world of development and design. So for example, at least for KDE, what we're working on today is in this thing called foundations. So at any level, any design system begins with a collection of graphics that are, imagine it's the bricks in a house, right? The bricks that build your walls, the bricks that make the foundation. And in these bricks, you have to have enough variety of components so that you can build awesome stuff on top. So when we speak of foundations in a design system, we speak very much about things like color, spacing units, icons, blurs and shadows, and typography. Okay? Remember that. So when you have these elements, you want to make space for enough variety to allow a developer or a designer too, to just simply select and apply. And the values that each of these foundations contain are decided generally by a group of designers that say, hey, this is our brand identity. We're going to create a set of colors that represent us, but we're going to make enough shades of the color so that you can actually work with them a little bit easier, and you can go up and down, left and right, whatever, right? And you can kind of tweak this. So with that in mind, I want to say maybe a year and a half ago, I was in one of our chats, like as we always do online in KDE, and somebody asked me, hey, wouldn't it be great if we change our base icon size from 22 to 24, right? Now you're like wondering, why is that, right? Well, 22 is not a very standard size, right, anymore. Most sizes in this type of work, in foundational design system work, is based on multiples of 8, or at least 4. And 22 is not one of those, right? So what it means is that when we designed our icons, they were made for smaller screens with less resolution. And it has not aged well, right? Nowadays, with screens and scaling, they don't look quite right. And not only that, for a designer like me, I can't center anything. And if there's something that you'll find out that irks designers, is the fact that you just can't center something, right? If you cannot center something, it's wrong, okay? That's a sin in design world. So anyway, so I said, hey, whatever, I'll go ahead, I'll pick up your icon, and let me see if I can work on it. And I chose, and forgive me for saying this, but I chose a commercial application for this. But it was, at the time, what was available to us. And for the sake of practicality and the ability to scale this design, I started working on that. And very quickly I realized that I think I bumped into a bit of a gold mine, because there were so many things I could do that were not possible for our previous designers that made KDE what it was before. I mean, at least at version 5. And I got excited about this. But then I'll give you a redeeming quality. We already are working on an open source alternative for this, and I'll tell you more about it in a minute. But so, who here has heard of Figma before? What about PenPot? Very cool. All right, so very familiar. So that's what we're working. That's what we have. And so I started building the icons, and I said, sure, I'll just make some of them, and I'll tell you how that happens, how I feel about it, and then if I can take on the work. And it quickly became something very simple, actually, much more simple than what I was able to achieve in other applications like Figma, like Inkscape, and no shade to them, right? I love Inkscape. I used Inkscape for many years, but there are a few elements of design at scale that are not present in Inkscape that, you know, for anybody that wants to save a few clicks, that's very valuable. So I made some icons. I used a few, design principles for them. And then I started investigating the world of design systems and how powerful they could be with tools like Figma and PenPot. So we built the foundations. And we took a design system that was available on the internet for free and tweaked it to be something a little bit more adjusted to what we want or what I would dream of KDE to be. So what did we work on? Well, we worked on colors, like I said. Who of you here have worked with Android color systems before? All right. I heard some people from GNOME that were working on this on a previous talk, so fantastic, good for you. So if you know anything about the color system in there, is that they use tokens, is that they use shades and swatches, right? And they usually have 100 colors for one color, for one primary color. So for example, if I choose blue in an Android system, the system will calculate 100 shades, so 50 to the right and 50 to the left, and 49 to the left, from the darkest shade of that color to the middle where your desired color is located, and then all the way back to almost 100% white. But the cool thing about it is that the system calculates that in a way that it's all within a color spatial curve that is correlated, right? So you're like, you might be thinking, well, why do you need so many colors, right? I've heard this question from KDE people as well. Why do you need so many? Like the system barely uses, like, you know, let's say 20 or 30 of them. Why do you need so many? Well, it's like insurance, right? It's for a rainy day. So for example, let's say that I choose a color that is not great, and when in practice I put it on the system, it just doesn't look good. When in an execution of an application or some shell or whatever it is, it's not what I dreamed of. And so now, instead of redoing and arbitrarily choosing a different color, we can just move the slider a little bit back or a little bit up, and we make it darker or lighter, and you can stay within that color family. And it's correlated, so now it all looks harmonious, right? So that's what we did. We created a system of colors that now has, you know, as you can see in some of these screenshots, some very specific values. They were calculated, and we did it in the style or the methodology that Android uses, not for anything in particular other than the fact that it's just good, like I said, insurance, right? It's just good for a rainy day. Then we selected a few color shades, and actually, you know, this is a little bit too bright over here, but like the one on the back, you can actually see what the colors look like as our primary colors. Oh, okay, sure. People are telling me that my microphone is not close enough. Okay, and so these are our colors, this palette right here. Then we worked on typography, and I'm sorry that the Y is like living there by itself, but the thing is that this is how it got rendered out of Google Slides. But same idea for fonts, right? Same idea. Now we have a series of display fonts with various levels, with like different tracking, with different scales. And we also have some textual fonts that you can use on the desktop and whatever other application you may want to have. So all in all, we went from like maybe like 6 typography levels to something like double or triple that. And again, insurance, right? So for example, at least in typography, we have ideas around, like, you know, the font size, what it means in REM, although we don't use REM for KDE, but at least it's good ideas around, you know, what most of the industry uses. We have concepts of line height, and then the tracking, especially for display fonts that are huge, like for TVs or, you know, projectors and stuff like that, where, you know, sometimes the fonts become too large and you need to like kind of get them closer. So This one you can barely see, but the shadows, again, shadow levels that you can parameterize, and you can put all of this in Figma and Penput. You can actually create a box and say this is a parameter, and then you can hand that over to a developer, and the developer will know exactly what was used for that shadow. Then we created a system of spacings. Now this is not too new, but again, in KDE, for example, we only have 4 spacings right now. And that's what it's all throughout our UI. And then, if we need more or less space, we do math on those spacing variables. Instead, I think what I'm proposing is that we have more specific variables and for spacings, and then we can just rely a little bit less on math, because that also can be a little convoluted, especially when you're reading the code. And then we created a few icons. This is where I started, right? Now, I shouldn't take the credit for myself. A lot of people that like this work joined me and created a lot of ideas around icons. And so we landed on something a little bit more rounded, a little bit more friendly, a little bit more sort of simplified. Because if there was another thing about our previous icons, is that they were not as simple. They needed to convey a lot of information. But again, as things have evolved, we have worked on different ideas around what every symbol means. And if you've done any kind of UI work, this is a ton of work. I think our 22 pixel collection had 1,600 icons. A ton, right? But through the help of many people and a lot of the powerful features of Penput and Figma, we were able to execute these very quickly. Especially because, I don't know if you know this little secret, but speaking specifically of just like graphical applications like Figma, you can say that, for example, this square is a component. So I'm going to repeat it here, and here, and here. And I just copy, paste, paste, and I just add some simple edits to it, right? So that's what allows you to sort of scale up. And not only that, that component, you can save it in a library, and the day that you decide that maybe the corner radius needs to be 4 pixels instead of 2, like we're doing here, you just change that. And all of these icons will change at once. Now, this concept is probably not new to developers, right? Like, you work with variables all the time. But for designers, like, you know how many clicks it takes to make all this? It's a ton, right? So carpal tunnel all along for all designers. So anyway, so that's what we have. And most recently, I'm going to show you later, but we created a monochrome library. And then most recently, a couple of months ago, we completed that work and moved up to the colorful library. So I made some color icons, and still very, very alpha in design-wise, but I hope you like it. So here's some of the results. Now, this is very monochrome. Of course, at this level, there should have been a colorful icon. So, but at least, for example, you can see that our sidebar and top now render these things. You should keep in mind, though, that in some of these, our icons are still 22 pixels. They're a little crunched. In other areas, they're centered. But by large, by far, they're mostly 24 pixel renders. So this would be an idea of what Dolphin looks like. This would be an idea of what our system settings looks like. This would be an idea of what Discover would look like with the new icons. Ocular. This is Gwenview, I think. And this is a preview, okay? Do not tell people that this is what KDE is going to do. But this is basically what I've been working on most recently. And cool development, a big technical change, at least for us, is that in previous iterations of Qt, our designer system, we didn't have support for shadows or blurs, but now we do. And so, with that in mind, our icons actually here are using blurs and shadows. They're hardly, you can't see them really well rendered on a screen like this, but they do. And I didn't have to do any tricks with the way that the graphics were put together to render this stuff. So with that in mind, so we've been working on this, and so I would like to talk about like what is the benefit of all this, right? What do you get with all this work? So for one, this is a little bit of what Figma and Penpot look like. They have just a sidebar with a bunch of variables that you can code in or set. And I can very easily export this in just a JSON file and say, here you go, developers, these are our foundations. Just, if you can publish them or put them in our code or make, these are the values, everything is in there. And at least as far as I know, I didn't have to compose a JSON file because I'm not a developer. I don't know how to do a JSON file. And so for me, all I did was just to move colors and values around, right? All graphical. And then this is the way that they interpret shadows, for example. Again, same idea. You give them names, names that mean something to developers and designers as well, and you name them in ways that seem a little bit easier. Again, all of this you can just export and pass on to somebody. Same idea for typography. And I don't know if you know this part, but like, for example, in this little edit, if one day we decide to change something, I could just go down to that variable and say, well, today we, don't want the regular size to be 20. We want it to be 22, 23, and we just change it there, and it changes everywhere. So whatever mockups have been made, they will update immediately. So what are some of the design principles that we're trying to use here? We're thinking of simplicity. I think if there's one thing that, KDE is known for is that we have a lot of options, right? So sometimes overwhelming, but we have a lot of options. And this is a challenge for us as designers, right? How do you put so much complexity in a way that regular people can use them, especially people who don't know the technology that goes behind it, right? And so some of these ideas were in my head for a long time, and I just thought, hey, if there are ways that, we can build the experience to be much better than it is today, it has to be something more familiar to people than what they, Have you ever heard of this principle in user experience that, most of the times users choose to be in somebody else's website or location? So what that means is basically that users don't spend most of their time with your system, they spend it outside of your system with other ways of interaction. Therefore, if you want to be similar and get people to stay in your system, you want to be familiar to them, right? Because you can't assume that you're the primary system they use. And so with that in mind, one of the big pushes in this design work was to be more standard, right? And try to use concepts that are, more universal, that are understood across things. If you want to like a song, you put a heart on it, right? You don't put a square, right? So those ideas, right? And it turned out very, very nice. I'm happy for the work we've done. And there's a lot more to do. but I think it's already generating a lot of conversation around KDE and a lot of good, sort of leveling up of our ability to communicate with users. Because at the end of the day, that's what it is about, right? It's the ability to bring technology to everyday people. So that's how we worked on design systems. What do you think? So the design system is honestly just a collection of shapes based on CSS and that you can easily export, but to the developer, it's all code, and to the designer, it's all graphics. Perfect. Because I don't have to touch any code, and I can quickly give clear information to our designers. So let me see if maybe that could be the last one. Yeah. Okay. So what do we have next? Right now, we just had our Plasma sprint in Austria, and I would say 90% of our icons are done. The rest, that's the last piece of the foundations that needs to be done, at least at the graphical side. Now comes the implementation side, where our developers are going to help us basically execute some of these things and build the bricks that will put our house together. We got some good work on the way. And then after that, we move into the world of components, okay? So if you have worked in design systems before, you know that most of the times what happens is the designer gives you a component, right? They give you a list, they give you a window, a layout, some kind of thing that's graphical. On the back end, it's all coded, right? The same way that developers would use it. And you get just a very organized system of graphics, basically. Now, why am I saying that this is a scalable system? Because it doesn't depend on me, right? I don't have to be there for the design components to stay alive. In systems like Figma and PenPod, other designers can copy your library, use all of your foundations without the ability to modify them, so your designs are high fidelity. From the get-go, they're all coded in. And they can actually build their own UI to represent whatever they're working on, and then export it and give it to a developer. Now, of course, the developer doesn't get any of the functionality code in it, but at least the shell, the looks of it are ready to go. And because of that, of course, you know, design systems require maintenance, but it's less burdensome on one person, and it's much easier when you have multiple designers that can actually do the work. If somebody has an idea, very much like we do in open source, if someone says, hey, you know what, your display font is just terrible, doesn't work, well, they can actually submit a request through the design system to me or to whoever owns the file to say, we want you to change the font. And I can decide whether to apply that change or not. Or I can test ahead of time and say, okay, sure, if you want me to make this display font higher or bigger, sorry, I can see the results and I can either accept or reject your change. Another cool thing that happens in design systems is that they are very transparent to users. I can very easily share just the whole icon file on the web, and people can go to it without an account and leave a comment on an icon or another graphical asset and say, you know, there's something wrong with this, can you change it, can you, whatever. And so, do you see more or less where I'm going with this? Do you see how this is the basic problem with design most of the times, is that we are artistic people and we know very little about being organized. This better? Okay. We depend a lot on others to help us get organized. And we want to express our work in systems like, you know, computer systems, but it's not as approachable to us. And so I feel like with this system, we can more easily become part of the conversation. And I'm hoping, in the distant future, KDE particularly can be a design-first type of entity, where our developers are not burdened by creating code first, but coming to designers or designer teams, or even taking the design system themselves, a copy of it, and building their own UI without worrying about whether this thing is going to be good or bad, because it's already set up for them. And then they can more easily execute their vision. So they spend less time designing, they spend more time executing. So I can see a bright future here. If you can see the vision with me, it's awesome. But what I'm saying is that, at least for open source particularly, we are working with PenPot, the open source alternative to Figma, to actually move our assets away from Figma and into PenPot eventually. They're still working on a few bugs that don't allow us to do this today, but they have assured us that in a couple of quarters, they're going to be ready to support us. So we're super excited for that. And at that point, we can start building this, communication tool for everybody. And I'm hoping that maybe, if for the people online or for you all here in the audience, you can see how this could be super beneficial, right? You can build a distributed design model using tools like this. And all it takes is just committed designers, as I know, GNOME already has, and other, other desktop interfaces, and just make it a little bit more self-sustaining, less burdensome, and adapted to the ability for each volunteer to help with. So with that in mind, thank you so much. This has been the talk. Hope you like it. Thank you so much. Is it working out?
So, any questions from the audience? Please raise your hands. In the meantime, I'm also checking online if there are people from home that want to ask any questions to Andy. Please feel free to send them in the chat.
I think I see a couple of hands over there.
Hi, thank you for the talk, appreciate it. Really like hearing the use of sort of PenPot. I know part of one of its core features, it uses for the file form, I believe is SVG as core to it, which is very, very appealing. Have people been using mostly Figma transitioning to PenPot, or have been using PenPot? And if using PenPot, is there any particular features or things that are missing or would be ideal to have that will better support the work of KDE, or is everything you need already there, so to speak? Yeah,
and not being someone from the PenPot team, I understand some things about their limitations today. For example, they relied primarily on the SVG renderer provided by browsers, and they're all different. And this led to a lack of performance in PenPot. For example, very simple case, I copy-pasted 1,600 icons into Figma. Figma organized them, spaced them, made a table with them in 2 seconds. PenPot, unfortunately at the time, put 1,600 icons, layers, one on top of each other, and it never finished. It made my browser hang. And so they know this is not news to them, and because of that, they actually decided to use WebAssembly for the front display where you work all the graphics. And that's their primary objective now, to actually transition their system from the SVG renderer provided by browsers into WebAssembly so they can use more resources from the computer more directly and not worry about what the browser gives you or doesn't give you. So that's one limitation that they had, and unfortunately made it very, very difficult for us to like start clicking, render, and you know how frustrating it can be when you just can't move this node the way that you need it to. And then other little things like, for example, and we have reported all this, for example, shape unions. You know, if you have a path-only circle, and then you have a filled circle, if you want to do a union Boolean operation with that, you can't do it. Both of the shapes will turn into paths, so there will be no fill. On Figma, no problem. There's just a path and a shape, and they're all together. I don't know how they do it, but it works. And so, and then another one that like we struggle with, if you notice our icons now have little like rounded corners, whereas before they used to be sharp corners. Unfortunately, PenPod can't render those when you use path-only shapes. And then added to the fact that you can union them, you can parameterize them, it's just we can't execute the same icon. We would have to jump through a lot of hoops, but they know this. We submitted it. We have people from PenPod in our Plasma Next channel in Matrix that they tell us immediately when a new version comes out. In fact, PenPod most recently made their 2.6 version where they included a famous plugin for Figma called Token Studio. Token Studio is kind of a supercharged token library maker for Figma, but now it's natively integrated into PenPod. So from the get-go, you have all these other abilities to create more parameters for a lot more graphics and for a lot more ideas that you have. And that's because the creator of PenPod Studio Token Studio loves PenPod, so he wants to move all his work there. So great things are happening, and I'm excited for it. PenPod is doing great. It's just the move from SVG renderer on browser to WebAssembly is a huge task, and it's going to take him a few months to get it done. Yeah, but that's the only reason.
So, quick question about. Good. Yeah. Quick question about. Could you see it integrating with OpenQA? Because I know Jonathan sometimes will get bug reports from, some different uses there before he even catches it. And I know that with font changes, sometimes we'll get errors within OpenQA.
Yes. So good question. So my understanding is that at least in PenPod, you're able. This is just a JSON file. So whatever design you have in graphically, you can export it as a JSON file, and you can potentially put it in a GitHub repo, GitLab in our case, and you can actually run checks on it. You can just do whatever tools you have for QA, and you can just make sure that it's good. Whether the checks are, how do I say it, like, whether the checks apply or not, it's important to know something. For example, like most recently, I just received a bug report that one of my icons in the icon system doesn't follow the color rules that we have in KDE. But to me, the change is to just make sure that that icon is using the color parameter that I set, right? But maybe in code, your QA thing will say, well, in this line, I was looking for this color name, and I found something else, so I'm going to tell you that that's wrong, right? So your QA systems may be good alert systems, but the fixes sort of belong more on the realm of the graphics side. But yeah, absolutely. You can export this thing. You can put it somewhere. In fact, people could very potentially, and this is something that PenPod people have told us is that you could very easily like pinpoint at the code and say, hey, there's something wrong here and we want you to change it, and you could. Yeah. Which is actually a paid feature on Figma. So in Figma you can actually, I don't know if you've heard of developer mode, but you can turn on a toggle. I pay for it, but that's why I can see it. But otherwise you can't see it. On PenPot, that will be transparent to everyone. So no paid feature on the side of development. So developers can go there and see a developer-oriented render of our graphics, basically. Yep.
Any other questions from the room? Then we have a question online. Just give me a second. So back in earlier 2010s, seeking help usually would seek help usually by blasting in mailing lists, which is not a thing in today's community. What if we do sort like bulletin or sticky posts on Discourse to gain help from other developers, contributors?
Well, I guess that depends. That changes per community, right? Because every community works in a different way. They communicate through different channels. At least for KDE, we use Matrix, and to some extent Telegram. Our mailing system is over the years has become less and less used. So we like to have that direct communication more often, and then since most of our work is on GitLab, you can actually leave comments on GitLab. But whether we would want as a community to move away from stuff like that and then sort of jump into places like Discord for whatever reason, I wouldn't say that that's up to me. It's more of a community-wide type of change and shift. I think the only difference with this design system based on Figma and PenPot is that regular people, everyday people can just get a link for our design file, and they can just go there directly without any accounts and leave comments so that we can work on something a little bit more graphical. And maybe by that you skip something like, a merge request on GitLab, which is not as approachable to everybody. But I'm not saying that we are trying to change the way we communicate, because this type of method has no bearings on development. Figma is nothing about development. It's all about graphical representations. So I would say that depends on the culture at your particular community, and if there is willingness to do that, that's not up to me.